Hey friends, Jeff here with a new episode of Conversations Life Science Leaders Aren't Having. Today, you're in for a real treat. It was a treat for me. We welcome as a guest Mick Ebeling. Mick is the founder and CEO of Not Impossible Labs. Not Impossible Labs is an innovation incubator that produces solutions to societal absurdities or problems to improve lives for everyone. I met Mick at a conference a couple months ago, had a chance to hear him speak and share the stories of Not Impossible Labs and the story around the genesis of Not Impossible Labs and how it was inspired. Now, Mick doesn't fit the normal profile of our guests of CEOs or senior leaders for drug development or biotechs, but he is absolutely a life scientist. Some of the things that they've worked on and rolled out at Not Impossible Labs is a way for an artist who was struck with ALS to be an artist again, for a young man and others in Africa who have lost limbs just tragically through roadside bombs to have freedom again and independence with 3D printed limbs. And the list goes on. And Mick, in this conversation, dives into one of their current projects or companies called Bento. And you'll learn all about that in this conversation. What I have come to appreciate about Mick is he is fearless. Not fearless, but fearless. And we talk about that in the conversation. He sees fear and he keeps moving through it. This is an inspiring and energizing conversation that I think you're going to love. I hope you enjoy this one with Mick Ebeling from Not Impossible Labs. Mick Ebeling, welcome to the show. So excited to have you. I've been, ever since the notion came to invite you here and for us to spend some time together back at the end of February, I've been just looking forward to this. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me, Jeff.
You're welcome. So I just did a brief introduction of Not Impossible Labs and of you and who you are to me. I would love for you to start us off and give us an inside look at what you're up to in the world.
So Not Impossible Labs is what we call an incubator for good, right? We are a social incubator. So we look at social issues that exist in the world and we figure out how, through our design process and design approach, how we can tackle these things that we call absurdities, how we tackle these things. And then once we've solved them, once we've created a prototypical solution, how we create scale to solving that issue. Fundamentally, we exist to solve the problems, not to be a business. We are a business. We aren't a nonprofit. We have a nonprofit arm that operates independent of Not Impossible Labs. But there's a philosophical kind of thing for me where I don't believe that doing good is a prerequisite or is a something that's only sequestered to nonprofits. I think that doing good should be how we operate as humans, and the best way to achieve that should be the best way to achieve that. Is it a nonprofit? Is it a for-profit? Is it whatever it might be? So that's kind of core to who we are whenever we're trying to solve these issues. We're working on a multitude of different things right now. I think for the sake of this conversation, I'll talk about something that is very, very near and dear to me and to Not Impossible Labs. And it's a company that we've spun off called Bento. And you can find out about that at gobento.com. And it was based on this aha moment, which is kind of funny to say that it's an aha moment, around this concept called food insecurity. And I didn't know. I grew up as middle. Like if there's a middle of middle class, that's me. I grew up as middle as it gets. And I didn't know, I had never heard of this term, food insecurity. I thought you were either homeless and hungry or you weren't. I didn't realize that there was this tweener zone. And so we launched first this thing called Hunger Not Impossible, which was, probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And it was almost this exploration around how to address food insecurity. And then as it evolved, and we can delve into it deeper, but as it evolved, as our solution evolved, this thing called the pandemic hit, and we rolled it out in earnest, again, not as a company, but as our civic response to our community and trying to help our community who, kids were losing their free and reduced meals, people were out of work, restaurants were going under, and we saw it as a way to try to stimulate, a solution around those people. So that for us right now is, what occupies a lot of my headspace and heart and mind and energy right now. We've got other things that we're working on right now, but that's something that I think would be really fun to talk about with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to dig into that. I want to go into your story because I just find it fascinating. You come out of the film and the creative industry. You still are creative. But back 2013, as I was preparing for this, I read probably several times you acknowledging there at the beginning, after that first initiative, that you were scared, that you didn't have a plan, that it wasn't perfectly laid out. And I really connected with you as I read it or heard you say it in video. What is it about you and your story that allowed you to push through the fear and the uncertainty and the not knowing?
Well, I think that part of being a producer is your job is to be comfortable in the whammies and the jack in the boxes and the curveballs that get thrown at you, right? So when we launched Not Impossible Labs, which was a byproduct of the discovery of a paralyzed graffiti artist who had been lying motionless in bed for 7 years, unable to talk, unable to communicate, and we ended up building a team to create an ocular recognition device that allowed him to draw again for the first time in 7 years. And in fact, this is what it looks like. This is called the eye writer. I thought that was a virtual background. It's not. It's a real background, right? So this is the eye writer, which is kind of, I'll try to put that over here so you can see it a little bit. But this is a cheap pair of sunglasses from the Venice Beach Boardwalk, a coat hanger that we duct taped to the side. We bent it around to the front, and then we zip tied a web camera onto the front. And so when the artist would put it on, the web camera would, this is open so he can see, the web camera would track his pupil so he could draw again using only his eyes, right? And so that was the launch of Not Impossible Labs. And it was based on just this desire to help him. We didn't know what we were doing. We had never heard of the word ocular, the terms ocular recognition device, but there was this feeling that we had to do something. And so we did. And that ended up, was the genesis of our launch. We won Time Magazine's top 50 inventions. It was honored and all these different things. It got me my first TED Talk. I always wanted to do a TED Talk. On my first TED Talk. It's now part of the permanent collection at the MoMA in New York. And that brought up this thing for us. And for me, I was like, wow, just doing things to help people, just creating technology. One of our kind of mantras or encapsulations of who we are is technology for the sake of humanity. And watching that really ignite and the passion behind it gave us the motivation to go out and try to do it again. Well, we didn't know what we were doing. So there was intrepidation, there was caution, there was, as you said, there's a little bit of fear, but there was this sentiment of, well, we can't not do it. It might be scary, but we can't not do it. You have to do it. And so that was really, I think, if you really boil Not Impossible down, it is this feeling that we have of when we see these absurdities, we see these things that exist in the world, and you say, that's not right. The world shouldn't work that way. A paralyzed artist shouldn't shouldn't be unable to talk and communicate with his family or be able to draw again. We got to change that. That's this revulsion almost that you have when you see these things. When that happens, let's see if I can do this right there. That's Daniel. Daniel was a boy who had both of his arms blown off in the war. We launched the world's first 3D printing prosthetic lab in a refugee camp. Why? Because we knew that we thought that we could. We didn't know that we could. We thought that we could. And the way we always describe a lot of the projects is if you and I were crossing the street and there was a little old lady who, tripped and fell and there was oncoming traffic, would you hurry, across the crosswalk before the traffic, or would you stop and try to help her up, right? And that's kind of the way that we feel about all the projects, is that you can't not do it. You have to do it. If you think that you can, you have to do something, or at least try. And so for us, fear that's when we know we're in the right place. When we're scared, that's when we know we're in exactly the right place, because it means we're driving down and digging into something that needs to happen. And, we talked a little bit about this whole concept of failure. Every single thing that we have ever done at Non Impossible Labs has been a sequential series of failures until, lo and behold, one of them worked, right? So failure for us is a celebration of progress, far more than it is a reason to quit or a reason to be deterred. It's more like, oh no, okay, we disproved that, or we proved that, and now what's next, and what's next, and what's next. So that's that for us. Your question was around fear. For us, that's a good feeling. When you have that kind of nervous feeling in your chest and in your tummy, then you know, okay, we're doing the right thing. We're in the right place.
Mm. Who have you become through all this? There's a quote that we love on the show that says, John Ruskin said it, that the greatest reward for your toil is not what you get from it, but who you become by it or through it. I'm wondering, through it all, I'm sure your becoming precedes even Not Impossible Labs, but how would you describe who you've become?
I think that I've become more and more comfortable in the unknown, and more comfortable with tackling these massive absurdities, these massive issues, and kind of feeling, there's a famous quote, it's attributed to a lot of different people, but I think the most reoccurring person it's attributed to is, I think it's Rabbi Hillel, which is, if not now, when, and if not me, who? I think I celebrate that, and I live that every single day, right? And instead of the if not me, who, it's if not Impossible Labs, then who, right? And so we tackle these big, hairy, audacious things, and we've become and we've developed a reputation for, one, being brave and bold and going headfirst into those things, and two, lo and behold, these, unsuspecting characters from Venice Beach, California, that they're able to pull this stuff off. And I think that's a really great, for us, it's a great testimony to the fact that you do not have to have a PhD or degrees or diplomas or credentials to create, significant change in the world. You just have to have a belief that it has to happen, and a belief that it sure as well, it might as well be you to do it. And then the tenacity to persevere when the going gets tough, because it will get tough. So I think that's really who we have become at Not Impossible.
I just celebrated a milestone birthday, 50 years old, and I got the privilege at the gathering we had where people spoke some things into my life. And there was a few that I just was in awe of, like just amazed and humbled. I'm wondering the same question of who you've become. I'm wondering if those closest to you, who have been, maybe it's your wife one or more of your kids who were to answer that question, who has Mick become over the last decade, what would they say?
I think it's a lot. Honestly, you just asked me who I've become. I think that they would say something probably pretty similar. Is that there's a not a fearlessness, but an ability to go into the fear. And I think it maybe presents as fearlessness. I think that there is a refusal to accept the status quo. I think that there is a belief that I'm not special. I'm just persistent. And that I think the thing that distinguishes me and the thing that distinguishes Non Impossible Labs, I want to just keep saying it's Non Impossible Labs because the collective is what accomplishes these things, is this just belief that we have to do it, right? And so I think that people would talk about what we've accomplished as an incubator as a remarkable thing, because we don't I don't know of anybody else who does what we do for the reasons that we do. We are so grounded in our values, right? Like, it's so important to us that we stick to what our belief system. And so I think that would be another thing that would make me really proud if it came up that people reference that there is a relentless belief in our values and our ideals.
What are your values?
We have a series of them. One of them is that everyone is mission critical, right? There's another belief that we have that always in beta is another one. There's another kind of value that we have that is, so we have everything is mission critical. Everyone is mission critical. It's everyone's mission critical and everyone takes out the trash, right? So there's both an importance and a humility that we have. There is a belief that always in beta, I don't know if I'd mentioned that, like we're always refining ourselves and always trying to develop ourselves. Another one is urgency always, that there's always, not franticness, but that the things that we solve are things that are, you can't sit back and just go like, we'll deal with this tomorrow. We gotta deal with this another time. There's always a sense of urgency around what we do. So those are a couple of them.
I love the very, street levelness of all of those that you just mentioned. That they really have meaning just by saying the name of them. And I want to go back to Bento and Bento or any of the other projects, and through the lens of your values. You talked about the impetus for Bento, the pandemic, and all the elements that were happening in that time, food insecurity. I'm wondering how those values play out in making a decision to tackle a problem like the one that Bento is tackling.
Well, I think the urgency always is probably the most relevant one. Once we realize and discover that there's this thing called food insecurity, that we couldn't just sit back idly and say like, all right, we're just going to kind of coast here. We got to do something. So that definitely affects kind of how we think about things. And Bento was a response. Like we have to do something. Like we think we can. We proved in some of our early prototypes that there was a little thread of legitimacy and efficiency in what we were doing. So we said, all right, we got to go. We have to do this. So that's really was the driving factor.
Mm-hmm. But there's a million needs in the world, millions of needs and absurdities. If I just think about my own life, there's absurdities. How do you decide which ones are the ones that you're going to tackle?
So when we choose the projects, the absurdities that we're going to tackle, we have a process that we go through. And one of them is, first and foremost, is there an emotional response to what the absurdity that we're looking at? Do we see this and we're like, oh my God, this is something we can't just step away from. Like I can't believe someone hasn't solved this. I can't believe that this absurdity exists in the world. Then the next phase is we start to look at what it is, like what other solutions have been attempted, what exists, what doesn't exist. Sometimes when we see the things, we're like, there's something that already exists. We just need to help amplify that. But if we discover that no one has really done anything, then we go, oh, wow, this is something that is something that has to be addressed right now. Like we can't just step back and idly like just watch this happen. So once there's an emotional connection to that, and we've seen that there's not a lot of the possibilities in that place, then we kind of think about it, meditate on it, and discuss it, and then we jump in on it.
It strikes me that one of your skills, or this end skill of leaders, is to truly define the problem. I'm thinking about this in terms of your process. Like Daniel, yeah, he didn't have arms, but the problem that you solved, I'm guessing, wasn't that he had no arms. It was something else. And even with Bento, the problem, the downstream is food insecurity, but the problem that you ended up solving was something else. So I have to imagine that one of the skills that you have, or that you cultivate in your team, is to truly define what the actual problem is that you are going to solve. Is that part of your process?
Well, you said that the problem with Daniel was that he didn't have arms. Yes, and the problem was that the fact that his arms were ripped off of his body removed his independence. Right? So it was a question of how to create a solution that could give him some type of residual or remaining independence. With Tempt, it was, how do you give him the chance to express himself again? How do you take away an artist's ability to express himself, you take away the artist, right? And with Bento, our reason for existing is to ultimately to put ourselves out of business because we've solved the food insecurity problem, right? Now, as much as we don't ever subscribe to anything being impossible, that's a pretty tough one, right? Like that's a pretty wide and systemic issue. So we look at the symptoms of the bigger problem, and we attack those symptoms with a mindset and a framework that if we can do that and we can do it successfully, then we might be able to scale that and go kind of to the core of the entire issue.
Yeah, and again, I'm always just wildly fascinated by imparting or developing this mindset in those that you are leading, to cultivate that, because I'm sure the people who come into your doors who want to work with you and My Impossible Labs are massively talented. I can't even, it's unfathomable the level of talent of the folks that make up your team or want to make up your team. But then there's that next level of, you have that skill set, but now we want to cultivate this mindset or this culture in you, this spirit, as we now do this work together. So I'm wondering what is your approach to coaching or cultivating your team members and bringing them into this similar mindset, this culture that you've described?
I think that the beautiful thing about Non-Impossible Labs is that there is when you jump on board this pirate ship, there's already an inherent belief that in that mindset. I think it gets nurtured and developed and supported. So it's almost like if you want to eat healthy, and you start hanging out with a lot of people who eat healthy, you're going to eat healthy. So I think that that's kind of the culture of the place here, is you start to see things as possible. And one of the things that I try to cultivate here is this, and people say this a lot, and I didn't ever know that this term, servant leadership, was a word. I'm a product of a Jesuit education, and one of the core Jesuit tenets is be a man for others, because I went to an all-boys school. Or be a human for others is probably the new way of saying it. And I think that there is when we live in service of others, that's just kind of the core of what Not Impossible is. We're trying to solve others' problems and other absurdities. I don't know, there's just such an incredible sentiment that comes along with that, and an invigoration that people have to wanting to continue that. It's dare I say, it's addictive, right?
Yeah.
In terms of that rush that you have when you're truly in that space of helping people and creating something that could help even more people. There's a huge rush there, and I think that that's the mindset of the team. I don't know. I think that they have taken that on knowingly and unknowingly in terms of being at Not Impossible Labs.
Yeah. It sounds like it almost becomes self-fulfilling. There's this spirit, and then it's just because of the environment that you've created, it builds upon itself, and it's contagious. That's awesome. Yeah. So, Mick, the name of the show is Conversations Life Science Leaders Aren't Having or Not Having Enough of. I'm wondering, when you hear me say that, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
I mean, for right now, for where I'm at in my life and for where we're at Not Impossible Labs, I think that there's conversations that life science leaders are having around this concept of food as medicine. But I don't think that people are, plans and hospitals and medical professionals are fully like leaning in on that to the point of how it could transform healthcare, how it can transform health equity, how it could transform our the lives of our most vulnerable population. I think that conceptually, it's funny. Are you familiar with SDOH, social determinants of health? Have you heard that term before?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so social determinants of health is this fancy way of saying, and this is my translation, is when you do the most basic things and fortify the most basic things, people can be healthy, right? When people eat well and they eat healthy, like that's a social determinant of health that in terms of addressing someone's nutritional needs. And for us, that realization was like, well, duh, you don't have to, how many years of school do you need to go to make that realization? And so for us, we are, especially at Bento right now, are so passionate about using food as a vehicle to X. First of all, use it as this fortification, this stabilization tool in someone's life. Jeff, if you and I are hungry, we are not thinking about all the other things that exist in our life that are problematic. That's the thing that we're focusing on right now. If you can address that, then you allow lots of other lots of other issues to be able to be addressed. And so that's, I think, for us and for Not Impossible, for me right now, is that we need to address this fundamental human and social need called food insecurity. And that is, and as far as I'm concerned, that is the platform of Maslow's pyramid, right? Mm-hmm. You and I could live. I mean, there's a reality show called Naked and Afraid. They're naked. What's the one thing that they need to stay alive? Food. So we're about to embark on a whole affordable housing project. And it's ironic because what we have always said with Bento is that housing is secondary. You can live on the streets. You can live in a tent. You could live any place. If you've got 3 square meals, you have the ability to go ahead. You have the ability to kind of exist and to grow and to have the potentiality of thriving. You could be in a penthouse in Manhattan overlooking, the Central Park. If you don't have food, you're dead in 7 to 14 days. So for us, this is a question in terms of our society. If we can address this issue, it is going to so drastically reduce our overall healthcare expenditures that exist as a country and as a population, both public and private. We will be able to, I think it has the ability to affect our educational system in terms of kids being able to think and thrive. I think we have the ability to now have people be able to get jobs, to have social mobility, because they're not worried about this one fundamental issue that it is the platform that we launch kind of our life's rocket from. So for me, that's the conversation that needs to be taking place more.
So you guys are tackling this question around food. You started us off thinking about food as medicine, but are we really talking about that? Is that really what's happening? What is the conversation you want other CEOs, business owners, the world at large? What is the conversation that you want those that are listening to start having because of what you just presented?
I would say looking at issues that exist within our most vulnerable population, right? The question that I would pose would be, if we were to grant them stability, if we were to grant them a foundation to think of their lives and their family lives from, what would transform for them and what would transform for the businesses that serve them? If you're talking about life science leaders, you're talking about the businesses that serve them. And then what would happen for our society? Like, what would happen to our communities and our country? So the question to ask is, like, what if we strip it all the way back down to our most essential factors, the most essential things that exist in our life? You fortify that, and all of a sudden you give, we can go biblical on this. Is like, you can build your house on sand or you can build your house on stone, right? Mm-hmm. And this, to me, is an opportunity for us as a society to help put some stone under people's lives so that they have the ability to grow and thrive.
We have a mission here at Brilliance Within around leadership, that if the people that work for you are led well, they're going to be happier, more productive, better spouses, better community members, better grocery store patrons, and it feels like there's a belief here that when this most basic need is cared for, that it is going to there's going to be a ripple effect in terms of who they are in every other part of their life, and freeing up this energy to be able to tackle some of those other big problems that maybe they have to face in their life. So tell us more about Bento. Tell us about how it works. Tell us about what it is the path that you're taking with Bento to address this.
Bento is to me why I'm so proud of what we've accomplished, is that it is simplicity, in its most, I think, perfect essence. Is what we identified is that most people who are food insecure don't have access to the same, this is kind of a duck, realization, but we don't have access to the same supply chain of food or they don't have the same access to the same supply chain as that you and I might have. You and I get food 2 different pathways, through restaurants or grocery stores. We either order from them or go into them. Those are the 2 options that we have. If you're food insecure, you don't really have the option of restaurants and grocery stores, but you also don't have the ability. You're usually working multiple jobs. You've got multiple distractions. You got to deal with childcare. You're living multiple families to a household. You don't have the ability to go and wait in line at a soup kitchen or a food pantry, or, if it might be scheduled against some of your work and some of the multiple jobs that you have. So we said, well, what if we had and got basic API access to these food sources, restaurants and grocery stores, and made it so that people are able to, through a simple text application, and that was paramount to what we were doing, because if I said to you right now, hey, Jeff, I've got a way for you and I to fly. We can go fly like Superman. And you'd be like, it's amazing, Mick, let's go do it. I said, but you got to download an app to do it. You'd be like, oh, right? Like, shoot, another app. This is, you don't have to do anything special. You can just text, and you're sponsoring an organization, which when we launched during the pandemic, it was Boys and Girls Clubs and YMCAs and kind of, basically nonprofits. And now we've moved over into having Medicaid plans be able to underwrite this. But through simple texting, you're able to secure groceries that get delivered to your doorstep, and they're curated around your particular condition. If you are kosher, vegan, lactose intolerant, diabetic, you're a really difficult house guest to have over for dinner. But for us, the algorithm of Bento is that it just, now the groceries show up that are specific for you, right? And so we're able to curate around your specific health needs, around your specific preferences. If there's any kind of, nationality preference in terms of that you're Vietnamese, and so you just want a Vietnamese food or whatever it might be, like, all of those are just nodes on the algorithm. That's simple things for us. And so by doing this, by creating this really simple access to food, that's curated around your specific condition, you now grant people the ability to be fed, but in a dignified way. And so I'm really proud of Bento. I don't know I think I mentioned this earlier, but Bento was the second time that Not Impossible was honored with a Time Magazine top invention, right? And was named a world-changing idea. We had a bunch of different awards and accolades. But to me, the fact that we created the connective tissue to systems that already exist, so that you don't have to, like, people say, well, what's your inventory like? We have infinite inventory, because every grocery store and every restaurant that exists within the platform or within the region that the person lives, they're part of the supply chain to them. We didn't have to build it. We didn't have to supply it. We don't have to truck it. We don't have to source it. We just connect it. And that, to me, is a core principle at Not Impossible that we call frictionless innovation. How can we invent as little as possible? And how do we create something that evokes as little change as possible, or little behavioral changes in you as possible, and have it still develop or cause massive change to exist in the world? And that's really the core of what Bento is. And right now, just within one county alone right now, we're doing about 3,000 meals a week that are being delivered to the doorsteps of people who need it. And it's fantastic, because the feedback that we get from people, how it's actually changing people's lives through groceries being delivered. Like, there's nothing crazy, innovative, bizarrely technological about that. We're just making sure that people get groceries in a way that's suited to them, in a dignified and simple and consistent way. And we're watching people, because we have a relationship with them through text, because they're keeping us posted with what's going on. We're watching their lives being transformed. And that's what's just super exciting about it.
So lives transformed is a hard metric to put down in a spreadsheet or into a PowerPoint deck. How are you tracking and measuring your success and impact?
Our main goal at Bento is to how we use food as a tool towards a specific outcome. And that could be as simple as their belief that they now have a food secure environment. Could be how they get a primary care visit. It could be their A1C levels going down because they're eating, appropriate foods for their diabetes. There's a myriad of different things, but what we talk about with the plans that we work with is that what is important to the patient and what is important to the plan, And how do we use the connective tissue, that engagement tool of Bento, which uses food as the device to build trust between the plan and the patient? What is it? What else can we do for that patient, and what else can we do for that plan? Sometimes it's as simple as a primary care visit just to get them on the right track. Sometimes it's education around the foods that they need to eat and how to prepare them because they have diabetes. It could be anything, but you have to start with one, a dialogue and a conversation, and two, some trust. Once you have that, sky's the limit.
A dialogue and some trust. That sounds like some foundational building blocks to probably most of the problems that we have on this planet. If we could enact some trust and dialogue in lots of different places, that could be transformational.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. I mean, every problem that exists in the country, our country and other countries in the world, if we had that dialogue, what would take place?
So the question just here as we wrap up is, and maybe you've already said it, but you get the magic wand, Mick, and the magic wand plants the seed for a conversation that's going to happen with these leaders who listen to the show and others, but leaders of life science organizations. You get to plant the seed in their minds for one conversation they're going to have over the next week. What's that one conversation that you would wish all of them would have?
I would say, just staying in the theme of addressing the most fundamental human and social issues, is that what would happen if you looked at the patient population you serve or the society or the communities that you live in? What would happen if you created this foundational stability around food? What would be possible? Yeah. And how might that lead to fill in the blank? More community trust, more community stability. We always joked when we launched Bento is that you want to fight crime, you want to get out there and fight crime, feed all the people who are committing the crimes. Like, what would happen? We joked about it would be a great poster to have a police, like a mean looking like Chicago or LAPD, nasty kind of grisly police officer, but instead of a baton, he has a baguette. Instead of a stun gun, he's got a sausage or a sandwich or something like that. Like, what would happen if we used food as a way to build stability and trust in the community, and a belief that, the most fundamental need has been addressed. Now, what else can I think about? We had a kid early on when we launched on Impossible, and he said, now that I'm being fed, I can think about my goals. I can think about what I want to do with my life, right? He was a homeless kid. He's with a amazing group called Safe Place for Youth, SPY in Venice. And he said, now that I have something in my belly, I can actually think about my life as opposed to think about my next meal. And I think that when we really boil things down to their essence and those fundamental building blocks, as healthcare leaders, as civilians within society, we have an ability to address the problems that ail our society the most.
And I would just piggyback on what you said and challenge those that are going to have that conversation is you have an amazing set of resources with your people, with the platforms that you have, is given the gifts and the talents and the abilities you have, how can you contribute to that conversation? It's amazing. Mick, just as we wrap, what else would you love to highlight and point people to if they want to know more?
If you want to know more, go to gobento.com. We'll tell you anything you want to know about Bento. You can go to notimpossible.com and see all the various projects that we're working on right now. If this type of thinking and this mentality is something that you want to see instilled in your organizations, you definitely send us an email at info@notimpossiblelabs.com, and you can talk to us about the Not Impossible Institute, which is this thing that we launched last year where we actually take the thought process and the design thinking of Not Impossible, and we're taking it into institutions, nonprofits, and government institutions and for-profit companies, and teaching them our design thinking so they can tackle the impossibilities that exist. And the way we say it is, you can tackle the impossibilities that exist in their world and the world.
Wow. That's a whole other podcast episode just to dive into those principles. So we'll put all that in the show notes. Mick, this is just a gift. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeff.
Really, really appreciate it, and can't wait till the next time.
Thanks so much. Great talking to you. Great to see you. Thanks for the invitation to be on your show.